Hello, this is a quick course in driving safety by Aaron Cowan. Just a little about me first. I do currently work as a licensing specialist at UNM Continuing Education in traffic safety. I was previously a secondary ed teacher with the Albuquerque Public School Systems. I was also a driving safety instructor. I originally created this presentation to fill some final thesis requirements for my master's degree. I've since completed that. And I've taught at Central New Mexico Community College for the last 6 years in a variety of different subject areas. So here are the learning objectives we've got. The first one is to define what we mean by safe driving. The second one is to talk about and describe some surprisingly effective safety tips. And the third one is to formulate a personal action plan. So what do we mean by safe driving? Seems like nobody got this joke. See, there's a picture of a safe, and they're driving it. But that's probably not what we mean, right? A standard definition, according to the National Safety Council, is driving in a way that saves lives, time, and money. At this point, I would want people to be able to discuss this when I present this. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Do you think that money, for example, maybe people don't agree with that. They might think that the money isn't as important as the lives or the time. This would be something that we would want to discuss with people. What we're saying is that, when you're saving time, we're not necessarily talking about speeding. Because if you're driving unsafe, in the long run, it's unsustainable. It could create wrecks. And in terms of saving money, what we're saying is that actually, if you drive safely, the return on investment for every dollar spent on safety is $5 to $10 in cost savings. And I have a reference for that below if you want to check that out later on. So those would be some of the items we could discuss in a facilitated discussion on that. Here's a small formative assessment. It just means that we're assessing what we've already talked about. I would ask the audience how many components of our definition of safe driving were there. Of course, there were 3. What was the name of the organization that I cited that defined safe driving? That was the National Safety Council. And can anyone name all 3 parts? Driving to save lives, time, and money. Okay, so here are some surprisingly effective tips for driving more safely. The first is to increase your visibility. Second is there are some times and places that are safer to drive in. So we'll talk about that. And the third one is to change your attitude about driving. These 3 things are surprising because they're fairly simple, but they can actually have a large effect. Okay, so here's a quick question. When should you turn your lights on? Everyone tries to remember, is it a half hour, or before, sunset, or after sunset? It turns out this is a trick question. The answer is, ideally, you should always have your lights on, day and night. Just take a look at this picture. We're saying that turning your lights on increases your visibility, and it decreases the chance, therefore, of you being in a collision. So you can see that the car on the right, the only thing that they've done differently is they've turned the lights on, and therefore it becomes more visible, and according to statistics, which I cite a reference at the bottom, decreases your chance of being hit by about 32%. So pretty big effect just by flicking a light switch. So it turns out that many modern cars, again you can see a picture on the right, have what are called daytime running lights, or DRLs. They're usually small LEDs. They don't use as much power as the headlights. They still increase the visibility of the vehicle, so a lot of newer vehicles already have that built in. But if your car doesn't, of course you can just turn the lights on. Either way, you should be able to pretty easily increase the visibility. Okay, so another quick question. This is actually on point number 2. Turns out that there is one city in the U.S. that has the least number of car accidents per capita. Does anyone want to guess? I'd normally ask people a few different things, and we come up with some interesting suggestions. So least number of accidents. Okay, it turns out it's Fort Collins, Colorado. So of course, one way that we could make everyone a safer driver is we could all move to Fort Collins, right? Of course, we're joking. That wouldn't really fix the problem. That would probably make Fort Collins more dangerous. But turns out that's one of those fun facts to know. Okay, so here are some tips about dangerous times and places to drive, and therefore times and places to avoid. We're saying in general between 5 p.m. and 9 p.m. is a dangerous time, and between midnight and 4 a.m. is also a fairly dangerous time to be driving. So if you avoid driving during those times, you should decrease your chance of having an accident. Okay, it turns out also weekends and holidays are pretty dangerous times to be driving. Of course, we can't always avoid that, but we're saying ideally, if we have our choice, there are a lot of times during the holidays that people do a little too much celebrating, and then they get out and start driving. Okay, and another tip, it turns out that city streets are actually more dangerous than highways. Most people think it's the exact opposite. Most people will say, I'd rather drive on the city streets because maybe it's lower speed, there are more stop signs, whereas the highway, it's high speed. They think of it as being dangerous because of the higher speeds, but it turns out that actually there are as many as 5 times more accidents on the city streets than there are on the highways. Because of all that stop and go traffic, because of all the distractions, because of all the congestion. If possible, driving on the highways is actually a way to decrease your chance of having an accident. Okay, and also it turns out that within a 10-mile radius of your home is actually more dangerous. A lot of people feel like when they are close to home that they're safe. And unfortunately, that's the reason that it becomes dangerous, is because they have a false sense of security. They feel like when they're in their own neighborhood at low speed, nothing can happen. But it turns out that even at 30 miles an hour, that's enough to do a lot of damage. And when people are within a close proximity to their home, they sometimes don't pay attention to what's going on, and therefore can be more likely to have an accident. This third tip, we're talking about transforming attitudes. So we're saying, imagine that you were driving around with, say, the Mona Lisa in your back seat. Of course, I don't think you'd be able to get a copy of the Mona Lisa very easily, but you could have another priceless piece of artwork, maybe that your mom or your daughter or somebody like that painted. But think about it, we're saying you'd probably drive a little safer if you had something valuable in your back seat. But wait a second, we're saying, isn't that just a painting? What about you? You have yourself in the car. You might even have other people in the car. Aren't they at least as valuable as just a piece of canvas with paint on it? Because you're the real thing. What we're saying is you're unique, just like the artwork. You're also irreplaceable, just like the Mona Lisa. And it's kind of hard to put a price on you. I'd say that people are priceless too. So, you actually are driving around with some priceless artwork, some other priceless artwork. So you might have lots of, think about your son, daughter, wife, grandma, grandpa, different relatives. You actually do have priceless artwork that you transport on a regular basis. We're saying if you think about it from that perspective, maybe you'll say, I want to drive more safely to protect. Okay, so just a small assessment again, just to make sure about what we learned. We said, when should you turn your lights on? The trick question, and the answer was you should always turn it on. What are DRLs? Of course, those were daytime running lights. Talked about some dangerous times to drive. We mentioned midnight to 4 p.m. We mentioned 5 p.m. to 9 p.m. I'm sorry, midnight to 4 a.m. And the other question, think about what priceless artwork are you transporting on a regular basis yourself, possibly other people also. Okay, so the last objective we had was that we wanted to create a personal action plan. This is what I'd recommend, that you identify some of the information that we've learned here that seems particularly relevant or interesting to you. Secondly, that you think about, you try to come up with some ideas about how you might actually take that information and turn that into actions. The third thing I'd recommend is that you set some kind of goal. Now, it turns out that many people use what's called a SMART goal. That's what's used here at the University of New Mexico oftentimes for our evaluations. SMART is an acronym that's supposed to stand for specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-bound. Actually, sometimes people have different words that they substitute in there for some of the letters, but it generally contains those items. It has to be specific. It has to be something that you can measure. It has to be something that has a time limit and that sort of thing. So try to come up with a driving safety goal for yourself. And then lastly, we're saying I'd recommend that you write down this goal, put it in the car, and that way you can actually consult it periodically. Not when you're driving, but you can look at it every so often. You can have your goal maybe on the visor or somewhere like that. I'd even recommend that you keep some pictures of the priceless artwork, that is, the people that are important to you in the car, and take a look at that. That may remind you of your motivation for driving more. Okay, so here's just an example of one that you might have made. You might say, my goal in the next year is to have no tickets or accidents. In order to accomplish this, I will get DRLs, daytime running lights, installed in my vehicle, or I will turn on my lights at all times. I'll keep some pictures of my family and friends in the car to remind myself of the priceless artwork that I'm responsible for transporting, or that is expecting me to come home. I might want to look into changing my work schedule. It is possible that you could leave an hour early or an hour late so that you didn't have to drive during the busy rush hour. You could also say, I'm going to try to not necessarily travel as much, especially by car during the holidays or on the weekends. You'd have to rearrange your schedule, but it's something that's possible. And since we know that city streets and the areas close to home are dangerous, you might also say, I'm going to resolve that when I'm on these city streets, that instead of feeling relaxed and complacent, I'm going to try to pay extra attention when I'm in some of these areas, because I know that they could potentially be more dangerous. And then this is just our final assessment. A summative assessment is just wrapping up at the end. So you would be assessing this video. You'd say, was this video what you expected? Did it meet your expectations? What was helpful? Did you find that it actually changed any of your attitudes? And is this something that you feel like you could apply in order to be a safer driver? So you'd answer those questions, and then you'd ideally give us feedback so that we could make this better. Thank you very much.